The first mirror lied. At least, that's what I told myself. I was only supposed to be cleaning the old guest room before my aunt came to visit. Dust covered everything, including a tall antique mirror standing quietly in the corner. When I wiped the glass with an old cloth, my reflection stared back exactly as expected, until I blinked. For less than a second, I wasn't looking at myself anymore. The person in the mirror was wearing a soft cream blouse instead of my hoodie. Long chestnut hair rested over delicate shoulders. Light makeup highlighted warm brown eyes. A gentle smile replaced the nervous expression I knew so well. Then it was gone. I laughed at myself, blaming the sunlight coming through the window. But the feeling stayed. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had that reflection looked familiar? Not like someone else. Like a version of me I had somehow ignored my entire life. The next morning, I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror much longer than usual. I adjusted my hair differently, tilted my head. What if? The question escaped before I could stop it. I had never seriously explored that thought before. Sure, I had wondered what different clothes might feel like, or why elegant outfits always caught my attention more than men's fashion. But wondering was easy. Acting was terrifying. Still, that image refused to leave my mind. Days passed. Every mirror became impossible to ignore. The mirror at work. The mirror in the elevator. The mirror inside the clothing store. Each time I caught my reflection, tiny details seemed different. My posture looked softer. My expression looked calmer whenever I imagined myself differently. It wasn't magic. It wasn't changing my body. It was changing how I looked at myself. That realization was somehow even scarier. One Saturday afternoon, I walked into a department store with absolutely no plan. I wandered through different sections until I accidentally stepped into the women's clothing department. My heart immediately started racing. I almost turned around. Instead, I kept walking. Nobody looked at me. Nobody whispered. Nobody cared. The fear I had carried for years suddenly felt much smaller than I expected. A pale blue cardigan caught my attention. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It simply looked comfortable. I picked it up, then quickly put it back. Picked it up again. Put it back again. After nearly 5 minutes of arguing with myself, I carried it to the self-checkout along with a plain white t-shirt. The cashier smiled politely. "Have a nice day." That was it. No questions. No judgment. I drove home wondering why I had been so afraid. Later that evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror holding the shopping bag. Opening it felt strangely important. I slipped on the cardigan over my t-shirt. Nothing extraordinary happened. Yet everything felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to look like someone I thought I should be. I was simply experimenting. The mirror reflected someone who looked comfortable. Not perfect. Not glamorous. Just peaceful. A smile appeared without me forcing it. I hadn't smiled at my own reflection like that in a very long time. Over the next several weeks, my confidence grew one small step at a time. A different hairstyle. Better skincare. Learning color combinations. Watching fashion videos. Understanding posture. Practicing a more relaxed smile. Each tiny improvement made the next step feel less impossible. The strange thing wasn't that the mirrors kept changing. The strange thing was that I finally stopped avoiding them. Instead of rushing past reflective windows, I slowed down. Instead of criticizing every flaw, I noticed progress. Every mirror seemed to ask the same quiet question. Are you becoming the person you've always imagined? I didn't know the answer yet, but for the first time, I wanted to find out. And then one evening, while organizing an old storage box in the attic, I discovered a faded photograph that would completely change how I understood myself and explain why every mirror had always seemed to be waiting for me. The photograph was tucked inside an old hardcover book that had belonged to my grandmother. At first, I almost threw it aside, assuming it was just another faded family memory. But something about it made me stop. There were 5 people standing in the picture. My grandparents, my parents, and me. I couldn't have been older than 6. What caught my attention wasn't the people. It was my expression. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at my mother, who was wearing a soft lavender cardigan and a pearl necklace. My eyes were full of admiration, almost as if I wanted to remember every detail of her style. On the back of the photograph, my grandmother had written a single sentence: "Always let people become who makes them happiest." I read it 3 times. It felt less like a note and more like advice that had been waiting years for me to discover. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead of scrolling through social media, I searched for beginner fashion tips, wardrobe basics, skincare routines, and color matching. I wasn't trying to become someone else. I wanted to understand why presenting myself differently made me feel calmer. I grabbed a notebook. For the first time in my life, I made a plan instead of hiding my curiosity. Improve skincare, learn posture, understand colors, practice confidence. Take one small step every week. Nothing extreme, nothing rushed. The next weekend, I returned to the same department store. This time, I wasn't shaking nearly as much. I walked through the aisles slowly, paying attention to fabrics instead of worrying about other people. I realized something surprising. Most people were completely focused on themselves. The fear I had imagined for years existed mostly inside my own mind. I picked out a soft knit sweater, a simple pair of jeans with a slimmer fit, and a lightweight scarf. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just clothes that made me feel comfortable. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror again. Something had changed. Not my appearance, my posture. Without realizing it, I was standing straighter, relaxing my shoulders instead of trying to appear larger. My smile looked genuine instead of forced. The mirror reflected confidence. That surprised me more than anything. Over the next month, little routines became part of everyday life. Morning skincare, drinking more water, keeping my clothes organized, learning which colors suited me, taking care of my hair. Instead of rushing through mornings, I started enjoying them. Each mirror became less of a judge and more of a progress report. One evening, while leaving work, I passed a large glass window that reflected the sunset behind me. I stopped. Not because I looked perfect, because I finally looked relaxed. For years, I had avoided reflections. Now I found myself smiling at them. That simple moment stayed with me. A coworker noticed. "You seem happier lately." I froze. Was it obvious? Had everyone noticed? I expected awkward questions. Instead, they simply smiled. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You look more confident." Confident. Not different. Not strange. Just confident. Those words echoed in my mind the entire drive home. Confidence. Maybe that had been missing all along. That weekend I decided to organize my bedroom. Old clothes I never wore went into donation bags. The room suddenly felt lighter.
So did my mind.
I bought a full-length mirror and placed it near the window where natural light filled the room every morning. At first it felt intimidating. Then it became my favorite place to start the day. Every morning I challenged myself. Stand tall.
Smile.
Be kind to yourself. Notice progress instead of flaws. Weeks turned into months. The changes were gradual, almost impossible to notice day by day. Better posture. Healthier skin. More thoughtful fashion choices. A calmer voice. Less fear. More confidence. Friends began asking if I had started exercising or changed my lifestyle. In a way,
I had.
The biggest transformation wasn't visible. It was happening inside. Then one rainy afternoon, while cleaning the frame of my new mirror, I noticed something unusual. A tiny folded piece of paper had been tucked behind the wooden backing. Curious, I carefully pulled it out. It was old. Very old. Written in elegant handwriting were just 8 words. The strongest reflection begins when fear finally disappears. I stared at the sentence for several minutes. Someone had hidden it there years ago. Someone who believed mirrors weren't about appearance at all. They were about honesty. And at that exact moment, my phone buzzed with a message that would test everything I had learned. A family reunion had been planned for the following weekend. Everyone would be there, including relatives I hadn't seen in years. For the first time since beginning this journey, I had to decide whether I would return to hiding or finally show the confidence I had been building one reflection at a time. The family reunion was only 6 days away, but it felt like 6 minutes. Every morning I looked at the calendar, and every morning the date seemed closer than I was ready for. I wasn't afraid of my family because they were cruel. I was afraid because they knew the version of me that had spent years pretending to be someone else. They had never seen the quieter, more confident person I was becoming. For a moment, I considered making an excuse. I have to work. I'm not feeling well. Maybe next time. Each excuse sounded convincing until I looked into the mirror beside my bedroom window. The same question stared back at me. If not now, when? That weekend I decided to prepare instead of panic. I laid out several outfits on my bed, trying different combinations. Some didn't feel right. Others felt like costumes. Then I put together something simple. Well-fitted jeans, a soft cream sweater, clean white sneakers, and the light blue cardigan that had started this entire journey months earlier. It wasn't about looking dramatically different. It was about wearing something that felt authentic. Standing in front of the mirror, I noticed something I had never seen before. I wasn't analyzing every tiny flaw anymore. I was paying attention to how I felt. That was new. The morning of the reunion arrived faster than expected. As I drove toward my aunt's house, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. What if someone notices? What if they ask questions? What if they don't understand? The thoughts kept coming until another voice answered them. What if none of that happens? When I arrived, laughter spilled out of the backyard. Children were running across the grass. My uncles were arguing about sports. My cousins were setting up tables. Everything looked exactly as it always had. I took one deep breath and walked in. My aunt spotted me first. "There you are," she said, giving me a warm hug. "You look wonderful. Have you changed your hairstyle?" I instinctively touched my hair. "A little." "It suits you." That was it. No awkward silence. No uncomfortable questions. Just a compliment. Throughout the afternoon, more relatives noticed little changes. "You seem happier. You've been taking good care of yourself. You've really grown into yourself." Each comment surprised me. Not one person criticized me. Not one person laughed. Most people simply noticed confidence. The fear I had carried for years slowly disappeared with every conversation. Later that afternoon, I found myself sitting beside my grandmother on the porch. She looked at me for a long moment before smiling. "You finally stopped hiding." The words caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the garden before answering. "When you were little, you were always trying to make everyone else comfortable, even if it meant pretending to be someone you weren't." I stayed silent. She reached into her purse and handed me a small silver pocket mirror. "I've been waiting a long time to give you this." It looked old, with delicate flowers engraved around the edges. "It belonged to my mother," she said. "She always believed mirrors weren't meant to judge people. They were meant to remind us to be honest with ourselves." I slowly opened it. My reflection looked back at me.
Calm, confident,
At peace. Grandma smiled. "You know it's different?" I shook my head. "You finally smile with your eyes." For a second, I couldn't speak. That single sentence meant more than any compliment I had ever received. The drive home felt completely different from the drive there. Instead of replaying awkward moments, I replayed encouraging ones. The compliments. The conversations. Grandma's smile. The pocket mirror sitting safely on the passenger seat. That evening I placed it beside the larger mirror in my bedroom. Looking at both reflections together, I realized something important. Neither mirror had changed me. They had simply reflected the courage I had slowly built one decision at a time. Over the following months, life became surprisingly ordinary. And that was beautiful. Self-care became routine. Fashion became enjoyable instead of stressful. Confidence became natural instead of something I had to force. People around me didn't constantly comment on my appearance anymore because they had grown used to seeing someone who looked comfortable in their own skin. One rainy evening, nearly a year after finding the first antique mirror, I decided to visit the old guest room again. The mirror was still standing exactly where I had found it. Dust had returned to the frame. I smiled as I cleaned it once more. Looking into the glass, I remembered the frightened person who had stood here months earlier, convinced that one reflection could change everything. In a way, It had. Not because the mirror possessed any magic, but because it encouraged me to ask one honest question that I had avoided for years. Who do I want to become? Now I finally knew the answer. Not someone perfect, not someone pretending, simply someone who felt genuine every time they looked in the mirror. As I turned to leave the room, I noticed one last detail carved into the wooden frame that I had somehow missed before. The carving read, "Every reflection begins with acceptance." I smiled, switched off the light, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I didn't need a mirror to remind me who I was. I already knew. The reflection had never been trapped inside the glass. It had been waiting inside me all along.